Good afternoon, all. On behalf of the Energy Cork Cluster, I'd like to welcome you all to this lunchtime briefing, our fifth so far this year. Thanks for joining us. We're delighted to welcome DP Energy to this event. It's a company familiar to many of you already, but one that is becoming more and more active both locally and internationally. DP Energy has been based in North Cork for over 20 years and is a great example of a Cork company leading the charge when it comes to the energy transition and climate action. As our speakers will expand upon, DP Energy is one of Ireland's leading developers of renewable energy projects and is headquartered in Buttevant, North Cork. It develops, constructs and has operated renewable energy assets across Ireland, Australia, Canada and the UK with a 1,500 megawatt portfolio of successful sustainable wind and solar energy projects. The company is also a driving force in the ocean energy space with tidal energy projects ongoing in Canada, Scotland and Northern Ireland. We're very pleased to be hearing from three of DP Energy's team this afternoon. Simon Pietro, who is the company director of DP Energy. Simon is currently co-president of the Ocean Energy Europe and is a board member of Marine Renewables Canada. Adam Cronin is the offshore technical and engineering manager at DP Energy. Adam leads the technical and engineering teams in the delivery of the company's Irish offshore wind portfolio. And Yvonne Cronin is the community and stakeholder liaison manager at DP Energy. Yvonne works on all aspects of public and community engagement for the company's Irish offshore wind portfolio. We'll aim to finish on time at 1:45 and hopefully have time for Q&A at the end. Do let us have your questions via the chat function. So just pop those questions in there throughout as they come to mind and we'll get to them at the end of the presentations. Importantly, Energy Cork hosted events would not be possible without the ongoing support of Cork County Council and Cork City Council through their respective economic development funds and the continued help of Cork Chamber. A couple of items of housekeeping. It should be already done, but please keep your microphones on mute for the duration of the event. As I mentioned, we'll have a short Q&A session following the presentations. Please use the chat function again to ask any questions you might have. This event is being recorded and will be shared online afterwards. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Simon. Over to you.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks, Kieran. And thanks to Energy Cork. So CEO and director, I think some of you may know of us. So we're a family, mother and son business, which has been around for a number of years, which makes us unusual in itself. We've also managed to keep under the radar for a number of years, so nobody actually knows where we are, because the number of times I've spoken to people about being headquartered in Buttevant, the usual response is, where in Buttevant would be the normal answer. So we have never really tried to make a lot of noise. But having said that, obviously the things are changing in time. But maybe just to those of you that don't know you, I'm just scribbling down. And I've sworn blind to Yvonne and Adam that I'll talk no more than 5 minutes, which anybody that know you is a fair challenge, to be perfectly honest. So there's my first major challenge. So our first project, County Tyrone, Bessie Bell, 5 megawatts, I think was 95, 96. The first one in the Republic, 98, Corrie Mountain in Leitrim. And since then, we've been doing wind in Australia, Scotland, predominantly Canada, and obviously back here at home. So our most recent project, which is now currently in build, should be mechanically complete by the end of the year, and then so into commissioning early next year, is Port Augusta. It's a 320 megawatt wind and solar project, which rather coincidentally, as you'll hear, is actually being built out by Iberdrola. So big project, wrong side of the world, fully merchant. Whoever thought that would be hard? But anyway, that's another story. So we have a team in Australia. We have a dedicated Canadian team, but we are very much Irish focused and Irish based. And although we are headquartered in Buttevant, you'll be delighted to know that we are moving to the capital shortly. So we're looking for office space somewhere down on the Keys, and we'll be setting up our Irish offshore wind team in the centre of Cork in near future. And also coincidentally, Iberdrola are also looking for space, and they are also, you'll be pleased to know, looking at Cork. So big news on both fronts, I think. So just to wrap that up, we are a wind developer, a solar developer, a tidal developer, an offshore wind developer. We also have big ambitions, I think, on the wave space as we get towards the back end of the 2020s. And I think that's going to be quite an exciting space as well, following on from offshore wind. But the primary reason for talking to you guys today is about our offshore wind aspirations. We are working on offshore wind overseas, but our big focus, as you may have gathered, I haven't seen the press, is our Irish place with 3 gigawatts in plan. So coincidentally, ironically, we've partnered with Iberdrola. That came in parallel with our Australian deal rather than as a result of. It came about by a phone call, rather funnily, saying, "Are you doing Irish offshore wind?" To which we said, "Absolutely, we are." And said, "Well, do you want to do it with us?" And we said, "Yes, we do." And I think Iberdrola, those of you who don't know, Iberdrola are a multinational. They were originally a Spanish-based business. They now own Scottish Power and have done for a number of years. They own Avangrid in the US. They own Infigen in Australia. And they are actually one of the world's biggest renewable developers and owner-operators. It's no accident that we ended up in bed with them. We like them, and I would thoroughly recommend people to have a look at the Iberdrola webpage and see that they are, I think, genuinely a sustainable business and have a very distinct green goal, which actually matches our own ethos, if you will. So that's that. So, I'm keen to hear if there's any questions. And I really just want to say thank you for Energy Cork for giving us the opportunity to roll out and broaden our little platform. And I love this, and some of you may already have seen this in Renews, and I want to see this in national press. But I think, I don't know who came up with the tagline of combining the talents of Budovan and Bilbao, but I think it's got a nice bit of humour to it as well. But we are very serious about the projects that we're going to deliver, and I'll let Adam and Yvonne talk to those. But we are very keen to be part of the Irish offshore piece, as we have been on onshore, and to continue developing that through to the 2030 target and well beyond. So we are very much an Irish-based business, and we'll stay an Irish-based business now. So thanks for that. So I'll hand over to you, Adam, if you can pick up the runnings and you can tell the intelligent side of the story than my just little spinny narrative. Thanks, Adam.
Great, thank you very much, Simon. Thanks for that. I'm just going to take a few minutes just to talk you through a little bit more detail on the Irish projects in particular. So we might just start off actually talking about where this has come from and a little bit on the policy and the legislation around that. So obviously, Ireland has fairly ambitious targets in relation to renewable energy and reduction of carbon emissions. And I'd imagine most people in the meeting today will be familiar with this. It's driven by our programme for government, the Climate Action Plan, etc. And particular to offshore wind, then there are targets there, 5 gigawatts by 2030, with planning for 30 gigawatts ultimately off the Atlantic coast, even though there could be a greater resource than that. There is a greater resource than that there, and it could be increased in time. And while the legislation is fairly new to us, the Maritime Area Plan bill, we're looking at it, and it has relevant projects and it has phase 2 projects, and we're looking at it at the moment. But for the offshore, the National Marine Planning Framework and the Maritime Bill are 2 very important documents for us that we're working carefully as we look at the Irish projects, the Irish offshore projects. So in terms of the project pipeline, what we're looking at, we have the joint venture arrangement with Iberdrola and DP. We have 3 key projects we're looking at here. So if you just look at the map for a moment there, we have an East Coast one called Shelmalier. We have a Southern Coast development, which I'll talk about a little bit more relevant to today's chat, called Inish Elga. And we have a West Coast off the coast of Clare. We have Claris offshore wind farm also. Each of these projects we have an ambition for 1 gigawatt. And just, to give some idea, what does that mean? Because we hear these figures bandied around and not everybody outside the industry understands them. 750,000 homes could be powered with 1 gigawatt, and it's equivalent to about 2 average coal-powered power stations in terms of what they can generate. So these are very significant developments. We do have another project in the wings, Latitude 52, and we are looking at other opportunities as well. And these sites here, we have a mix of technologies, and for our East Coast site in Shelmalier, that would be technology people would be familiar with. It's fixed bottom. It's basically piles into the seabed is what supports that. But for our Cork project and our Clare project, these would be floating projects. And I'll talk a little bit about floating now, if I may, just for those of you who may not be familiar about it. So it's basically doing away with the monopile structures, and it's putting the turbines onto floating structures. And there are many different types of technology for these floating structures, some being used at the moment and some under development, particularly under development for the size and the scale of these projects. But why do we go offshore, and why do we go so far offshore? Well, there's an amazing resource offshore, and the further out we go, where there's less effects from the land, that resource is very consistent, and from a development and an operational point of view, that's very beneficial. It allows us to use large turbines. I've got 15 megawatts down there, but even from discussions as recent this morning, that could be 20 megawatts in a number of years' time, or even greater than that. So these are very, very large generators. Another benefit of going offshore and floating is that most of the construction work and the fabrication work can be done in a port, and these are towed to site. So the time taken out on site is minimized. So minimizing any marine operational time is always beneficial from a risk and therefore cost perspective as well. As I say, there are a number of different types of floating technologies. The picture there is actually from Iberdrola. It's a graphic rather than an actual existing technology, but it gives you an idea of what these structures look like. I might just talk a little bit now about Inishelga Marine Energy Park, and this is obviously of most interest, I think, to most people attending today. This is our project that's situated off the Cork and Waterford coastlines, and there's just two distinct areas there on the plan I might just talk about for a moment. So the red area is the investigative area where we're looking to bring our cables ashore, and we applied for our foreshore license for that back in the end of 2019. We've been through the public consultation process, which was held in early 2020. So that's quite advanced, and we hope to be starting investigations, significant investigations shortly in that site at the end of this year. Some works have already commenced, in fact, in terms of our aerial and landfall ecological surveys have commenced for that. And the dotted line in the plan there is the 12-mile limit, or the limit of the territorial waters. So the grey area beyond that is where we are going to have our floating turbines. So as I said earlier, about 1 gigawatt size project. At 15 megawatts, that's about 70 turbines. That could be less as the capacity of the turbines increases, and it'll be floating technology, as we discussed. Obviously, the development will also have cables going from the turbines back to substations, and then from substations to landfall and onto the grid. So what do we do with this electricity then? So we'd be generating large amounts of electricity, as we said. Well, our number one preference and our number one option really is that it goes to the grid, and that'll be supported through a RES auction that's due to take place. And the RES auctions are really important in terms of there are many different facets to them. They're a huge help to the energy developers and the operators, but also they involve the community, and this community participation around the RES. It allows for diversification of technology, and obviously ultimately assists in increasing the energy security for the country. Another option we'd have obviously would be power purchase agreements. So that's, I'm sure most people are familiar with those, but companies would be able to, at a corporate level, buy green energy from us and or other providers. Green hydrogen then, so the wind doesn't always blow, and sometimes the wind blows when we don't need it. So we'll be generating electricity at those times, and that electricity can be used to create hydrogen through electrolysis. That hydrogen can be stored, and then there are obviously numerous uses for that hydrogen afterwards. Powering of data centers. Data centers are extremely energy hungry, and there's a prediction that by the end of the decade, data centers in Ireland would use about 30% of Ireland's current electricity capacity. So very, very power hungry. So a direct connection into data centers would be very beneficial. And finally, then export as well. We have an interconnector that's going to be constructed, and there may very well be additional interconnectors in the future, and that will allow then Ireland to export electricity to mainland Europe and beyond that. Okay, next slide then is around supply chain, and I can't overemphasize the importance of the supply chain to DP Energy and Iberdrola. We really want to work with as many local supply chain people that we can, from small companies all the way through to much larger companies. We know, for instance, the turbines are not going to be made in Cork. I think we understand that, but there's lots that can be done from Cork. There's lots that can be done from Munster and nationally, and we want to support that. DP Energy, along with other developers and other interested parties, are working on, have issued a plan, Cork Harbour 2025, which really looks at facilitating Cork Harbour developing into a renewable energy hub, not just for the South Coast. From a construction perspective, it could support schemes on the East Coast and the West Coast as well. We all know, we all live in Cork, we all know it's a deep harbour. And this graphic here is just showing Doyle Shipping Group site in Verome, and they kindly provided this graphic for us for today. One of their options for how they envisage their site looking to support the offshore renewable energy industry. And you can see that's a graphic, but it's the scale. You can see the size of the turbine in relation to the ship, for instance, that's moored. So as part of the supply chain, talking to the ports and the other port companies, and Doyle Shipping are very important to us here in Cork, they're going to be investing significantly in infrastructure development at this site. Another area in terms of supply chain is diversification. So we've had numerous discussions with Mainport, for instance, and they would have traditionally supported the oil and gas industry with their shipping, and they're now looking at moving towards supporting the offshore renewable industry as well, whereby they can assist with surveys and construction, etc. So existing Cork-based business that's diversifying to support this new sector. And then new entrants to the market. And I think, again, we're all familiar with Green Rebel Marine, a company going to be involved in data acquisition, data analytics, etc. They've ramped up very significant investment in Cork, and all the developers ultimately will be working with these new entrants, the likes of Green Rebel Marine, who all bring significant investment and significant job creation to the region. And obviously, we're working with Energy Cork, the Chambers of Commerce, and other enterprise bodies as well, to help us with the supply chain. And we want to talk to everybody. And if you just email us at info@dpenergy.com or go onto any of our project websites, and you can register as a supply company. And we don't mind how small you are. There's opportunities for companies of all sizes in these projects. Okay, so my last slide then actually is just leading on from that. What are the economic opportunities for Cork? And this is Energy Cork, so let's talk about this. Well, jobs will be created, and us and all developers are always very careful about how many jobs are created. It's a really common question. I would be surprised if it doesn't come up today. And there are a lot of different models that predict a lot of different job creation figures. But if we're conservative, what we see is that per gigawatt of energy development, we see about 1,000 jobs during the construction process, which is a 2 to 3 year project. We see about 300 jobs per gigawatt going forward with the operation and maintenance side. But obviously there are lots of other opportunities that are developed for businesses, in this case, Cork-based businesses. And we're happy to support those local businesses, working with, as I say, the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations. There's a great reskilling and upskilling opportunity as well here, and we'll be involved in looking at what the skills gaps are to support construction and operation of this relatively new sector going so far offshore with floating, and great opportunities for high-paying skilled jobs, and that'll be rolled out in conjunction with the educational bodies. All of this leads to economic growth and prosperity. So if we imagine Cork Harbour, for instance, having all this going on with various developers, and been supported projects on the East Coast, South Coast, and West Coast, it's obvious that there's going to be significant growth within the harbour and wider throughout the area. Partnering opportunities, this is important really for the smaller firms. So, we're already in discussion with small firms who in themselves, Irish-based, Cork-based, wouldn't be of sufficient scale to provide a service that we need. So they're going to partner. We can put them in touch with people. They can put themselves in touch with people in the UK and Europe, etc. And there's a big opportunity there. And inward investment. I said maybe slightly lightheartedly earlier, we won't be building turbines in Cork, but maybe we will be building some components in Cork. If there are sufficient projects of sufficient scale in Ireland, we do believe that inward investment will come, and some of that manufacturing will take place on the island, if not in Cork. And that's all I have to say for now. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll pass on to Yvonne.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Now, don't get me wrong, I support renewable energy, but this is one of the most common sentences I hear when I'm out and about meeting different stakeholders. Saving the planet is great as long as it's done somewhere else. So global support versus local acceptance is one of the trickiest areas of stakeholder engagement. The problem can be neatly bound and sorted into generally 4 areas. There's NIMBYism, which is the much used but unfair catch-all phrase for complex and the much misunderstood reasoning behind an individual's reluctance to welcome infrastructure into their lives. It masks a multitude of legitimate reasons for being less than enthusiastic about renewable energy projects in the locality. There's democratic deficit. It's the age-old situation where the smaller opposition groups are most vocal, hiding the silent majority of supporters, or more commonly, the neutral observers. There's qualified support. It's the misrepresentation of surveys out of context or based on certain conditions to give the impression of support or not, depending on the desired outcome. Then there's place protection, which seems to be the most closely related to NIMBYism, which is the belief that the installations will somehow devalue the location aesthetically, financially, or otherwise. So who are the stakeholders and how do we identify them? This is an ever-changing and ongoing process. The stakeholders can be identified by holding public meetings, engagement with local government, community groups and volunteers. There's snowball sampling. It's a little like networking. Known stakeholders volunteer other potential stakeholders like word of mouth. And then there's radical transactiveness. It's a method to used to identify the less obvious stakeholders, the fringe stakeholders, if you like. So all of these identified stakeholders can be categorized by geography in relation to the project, politics, who are the local councillors, the influencers, the history, who historically used the area, the general public, private stakeholders, businesses affected, and voluntary groups, which is a really important group who are already active in the community and also the academic world. So as the project develops, the influence and interest of these stakeholders will ebb and flow and change with each phase of the project. What's our approach to stakeholder engagement? So DP Energy and Iberdrola bring 2 very distinct and complementary skill sets to the table. DP Energy is a family-owned business. We change and maneuver very fast and have a long history of working in the onshore realm. And it gives us a great local knowledge and on-the-ground know-how. And then you have Iberdrola, who's a global energy leader. They have vast experience in offshore development and stakeholder engagement from which we can draw and adapt to the Irish platform. So we practice upstream direct engagement. We liaise directly with our stakeholders with an open communication channel from our stakeholders through me to our engineering design team and then further up the food chain directly to Simon. We don't just present, we seek input from stakeholders with 2-way learning, which is currently leading to some really inventive solutions to issues. So engagement has become long before decisions have been made while we're waiting for the foreshore license application to be processed. I undertake the direct fishery liaison with the help of our FLO, John Harrington. This is a picture of me with the famous Patrick Murphy, the CEO of the Irish South and West Fish Producers Organisation, one of our most important fishery stakeholders. We're actually hiding pints of Guinness there to have that photograph taken. So we're also currently developing the Buttevant Community Solar Project alongside Buttevant Community Council to bring the benefits of renewables to Buttevant as well. So the direct, just as an example of the direct results of our public consultation, the foreshore license application for Inishalga went to public consultation between March and June last year in 2020. We received about 127 submissions from the public about the project. And through listening to and acting on the submissions to the public consultation for Inishalga, we reviewed the area that we're actually intending to survey. Because of input from the Helvick Head residents and their concerns, we're no longer investigating the Helvick Head leg of the cable routes and landfall locations. And then equally from the suggestions that we investigate the area that the interconnector is coming ashore, we're about to submit an additional foreshore license just around Youghal area. So they're just 2 results of direct actions taken as a direct result of input from the community. So that's about all from me. Thanks very much for listening. Please feel free to get in contact with me to continue the conversation. My details are in the slide deck, and I'll hand you back now to Simon to wrap up.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and it's nice to be thought about as being up the food chain. That's not exactly how I view myself, but anyway, I'd like to think we're a fairly flat organisation and there isn't much priority. But anyway, I think just the key things I want to sort of just stress on the Iberdrola DP bit. It's a JV between ourselves and Iberdrola. There's a bit of a mismatch there, as you can imagine, in balance sheet and staff numbers. But having said that, I think we do bring a pretty big piece of skill set to the equation. We've been doing this for 30 odd years, and hopefully we're doing something right. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be still here. But we must be doing something right. Iberdrola obviously have big muscle, big experience, and let's face it, that they have capital. So at the end of the day, I'm looking at these projects. We have 3 gigawatts in train there. The key goal, obviously, is to deliver those to built and spinning, so that we're actually part of the Irish renewable environment, and the 20 and 30 target obviously being a key, but then also so will be 2040 and 2050. And it's a long-term relationship. We're expecting to deliver projects all the way through until we get to our 30 gigawatt offshore ambition, or whatever that may be. So the key thing for us is we know how to do it. There's massive experience within Iberdrola in terms of actually building offshore wind farms and operating them. And I think there's a big emphasis in that experience and that combinedness between the two of us, if there was such a word, which I'm sure there isn't, but there is now. And so just where are we going? I think the thing from our perspective is we can do it. We can do it quickly. We obviously need the community on board. We need the supply chain on board. We need grid. And you can't just think, as you'll have heard, you can't just think about these projects in silos. You have to think about, where are they going to be built from? And that's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity from a Cork perspective and a Cork Harbour, and of course everywhere else, is where's the opportunity for this stuff to be constructed. The government's doing a good job, I think, in trying to get the regulatory framework in place in terms of the bills, which are also going through now and are there and being discussed. And that's obviously necessary for everything. So in parallel with that, of course, there's marine protected areas. And then I think the key thing around all of this is actually how do we pull all this together and pull all together in what is actually a pretty tight time frame. We're now halfway through 21. If we want to be built and spinning and delivering that target that the government has, and we all have, frankly, for Ireland PLC by the end of 2030, then we have some work to do. So my perspective, I think, as a developer, is like, I'm just ready and wanting to get on with it. So it's exciting times, challenging times, but exciting times. But as I've often used the phrase, it's not rocket science. And if it wasn't hard, everybody would be doing it. So that's why we are where we are. And I actually do think it's a great excitement, a great opportunity. So I'd love to hear some questions, and hopefully that was brought a bit of messaging, and now we're finally out of the woodwork and everyone knows where we live now. So there you go. Thanks very much, everybody.
That's great. Thanks to Simon, Adam, and Yvonne. So yeah, look, folks, just a reminder, if you have questions, there are already some coming in. Drop them in the chat function. Simon, maybe I'll start you off with an easy one. Great to hear that. Look, you're Cork based already, a regional town, which is fantastic. But migrating to the capital, as you say. But great to hear as well that Iberdrola actually are looking at setting up a base and creating jobs in Cork. Can you expand a bit about how the partnership came about with Iberdrola?
As I said, it was a random phone call, but no, that's being a little bit facetious, shall we say. So obviously, as you may be aware, Scottish Power have a long track record in renewables. They were one of the first utilities engaged in onshore wind around about the time that we were doing early onshore wind in the 90s. So we've known of Scottish Power for many years. We did actually work for a number of years with their direct competition with Scottish and Southern Energy, rather ironically in a Scottish context. But essentially, I think when you're both operating in a given sphere, you obviously know of each other. You tend to know people in the thing. The Iberdrola Australia piece in terms of the Port Augusta project obviously helped. That helped build a relationship. But it is, in essence, I think if I could do these projects on my own, Would I? Possibly, but these are huge capital intensive projects. The cost of developing a project offshore, even in 10 meters of water compared to doing it onshore, is not double or triple or 5 times. It's 10 times or more the cost of delivery. And then when you're looking at the sort of delivery of these projects, nobody talks in M numbers. All we talk about is billions. And the reality is, if you're under pressure, as we all are in a climate agenda to try and push the climate agenda and get CO2 savings, you actually need big deployment of capital. You need big people who can actually do things in a big scale. And that's where I think this, let's say this nimble developer that hopefully knows the market and we think we know what we're doing, along with what is a major utility, I think is quite important. I also think that the fact that we have a shared ethos, as again, I'd recommend looking at the Iberdrola webpage. I think that shared ethos is important to us. There is a reason that we're partnered with them, is because we do think that we have that common ethical belief. So that's, I don't know if that answers the question, but hopefully.
I know that's great. Thanks for that, Simon. Adam, I guess if I can go to you, you know, within the context of our national ambition, which is quite grand, and you know, we have a huge resource offshore in particular in this country that we can pursue. You know, larger objectives of becoming energy independent, net energy exporter, all of these great things. But from a practical point of view, you know, what, I suppose, a couple of questions. Firstly, what enabling infrastructure or policy is going to be critical to achieving that or realizing that ambition? And secondly, then you already touched on things like green hydrogen projects, you know, coming down the track here in Cork, which is fantastic. How important will means of storage and transmission like that and interconnection as well be to us achieving and realizing our offshore ambitions?
Okay, thanks, Harry. Yeah, good questions. I think on the infrastructure part, you know, there's 2 elements to that. We have to be able to build. Also, the other developers have to be able to build these very large projects, and we have to look around the country and see what port infrastructure we have for that. And I think across the board, all the ports that can ultimately support construction will need investment, and will need significant investment. So obviously, we were hoping to the government that would be possible. Then there's the operation and maintenance phase of the project. So when they're built, you know, they're in the water for 35 odd years. They need to be maintained. We need a base for that on land. That doesn't necessarily have to be in the same site as construction. It could be in some of the smaller ports, but there's still a large infrastructure requirement there, which again requires investment, probably more likely to be private investment for that. So, you know, it's around policy. So it's around getting the planning right for the ports, and it's around getting then the funding that's possible for the port infrastructure development as well. In terms of, you know, the offtake and storage, etc., the best solution is a combination, and be that hydrogen or be it interconnector export or whatever. It's about having that combination there. The grid on the infrastructure side, and it's kind of linked to the offtake, obviously, the grid has to be right as well. The grid has to have the capacity to take the energy in the first place. But if it doesn't, and if it isn't, we need to have those other solutions. And also, as I mentioned, you know, if it's very windy and we don't need all that energy at that moment, what do we do with it? Let's not waste it. Let's store it and have it available.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks for that, Yvonne. Maybe to you, and like we're all aware, the social license to operate is absolutely critical if we are to achieve these targets. I mean, there are questions popping in there around what is the single biggest obstacle, if that could be defined. But I guess stakeholder engagement and buy-in is critical. I mean, what do you guys take a different approach when you know, progressing with stakeholder engagement, and are there lessons, I suppose, that have been learned from, you know, history, onshore wind, other projects, and other regions of the world, I guess?
Yeah, I suppose at DP Energy we really have a company-wide policy. We're on the ground. We go to grassroots. We make sure that we're totally accessible. It's my job to get as much information out to the public, and even more importantly, to get the information back in from our stakeholders. So there are two ways that you can approach stakeholder engagement or huge projects like this. One is the decide, announce, and defend, which is really a wonderful highway to failing at social license to operate. There's another, the other way of approaching it is informing, consulting, and involving. And that would be the way that DP Energy like to approach things. I've spent the last 2 weeks out on the piers with the fishermen on the East Coast with our Shelmalier project. I'm directly engaging with the fishermen for the Inishalga project. And going forward with our community engagement, it will be direct engagement. My contact details are out there wide and far to ensure that we can create a channel that's a two-way. We learn from the people in the area and the people can learn from us. So yeah, we have a very open, proactive, direct engagement program.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Adam, I guess back to you maybe with another one. You touched on some interesting kind of job multipliers, you know, linked to gigawatt scale of development, which is great. But there's an interesting question here from someone in the audience, David Canary, who's asked, you know, should the Irish government make it a requirement for developers to base assembly or manufacturing in Ireland, like the UK government has just done for contracts for difference?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Simon, you might want to jump in on this as well, possibly. I think that would be, in an ideal world, that would be great. I think that'd be great for Cork, great for the other ports as well. You know, do we have the manufacturing capability to do this? We don't have a history of heavy manufacturing in Ireland, so that'd be difficult, unlike the UK may have that. That doesn't mean that can't be changed. And I think when I spoke about the inward investment, that was what that was referring to, that there are very skilled people here. And if we don't have the facilities, what can we do to put those facilities in place around the country so that we can do the manufacturing of components within the country? It's obvious that the assembly and staging will all be done largely from Ireland, and the O&M will be done from Ireland. Can all the components be built in Ireland? That's unlikely. I think it's not realistic, but we should certainly be moving towards doing as much as we can in the country. Should it be a requirement laid down that has to happen? That's a more difficult question. I think, you know, this competition. We're in the EU. It's probably not that easy to do.
Yeah, if I could just jump on that as well, Harry, if that's okay. Yeah. I mean, we've, you know, intrinsically, I'm here for an easy life. The easy life to get social acceptance and to get people to buy in is everything's manufactured here, and everybody has a job here, and everything happens in Cork and then Munster and then Ireland, and that'll be great. The realism is, I think, of course, is there are competition rules that we have to follow. And the UK would be no different from that, or perhaps slightly different given their current circumstance. We won't. That's a whole bigger conversation. But I think it almost goes hand in hand with the development of ports and development of infrastructure. If government was to turn around and say, look, you know, we want to direct substantial funds, we will make the Cork expanding Cork facilities, Foynes, or wherever, and said, okay, we'll put the money into that. We'll also put money into the infrastructure in terms of getting the power away. Then obviously you'd be saying, well, on the other side of that, you'd be saying, well, surely there's a comeback from that. In other words, we'd expect to see projects more built here, and we'd be delighted to see projects and as much of the projects built in country as possible. You know, and coming back to the island PLC, there obviously has to be competition rules, but there is a balance here where I think where you can do the right things. But I think to Adam's point, and it's been a conversation, you won't be surprised to have known that this conversation about, same in Scotland, will you build a wind farm to a production plant in Scotland if we give you X, Y, and Z? And then the question is, well, how many gigawatts do we get? Certainly if there was a 30 gigawatt aspiration, and that turned into 30 gigawatts of real likely projects, I think we'd be having a very different conversation with the manufacturers than we are now. 30 gigawatts would be huge. And I don't necessarily think that's pie in the sky. It's a massive ambition. There's no question about it, given our size of our grid, but we could be a net exporter, and that could actually be a huge thing for Ireland, I think. So I'd love to say that the answer is yes, we could do more than just let the free market go, but I think that there's a bigger question there.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely a big role for government to play, I guess. Okay, so an interesting question in from Elliot Taylor. What would you say is the biggest obstacle to delivering yours and Ireland's wind energy ambitions, and has the nature of obstacles changed a lot over time? Yvonne, possibly, is that one for you? I'll throw it your way and you can bat it off if you want.
Well, yeah, I'm very tempted. No, the biggest obstacle, oh my God, like there are so many obstacles to these huge infrastructures. I suppose the social license to operate is so important for all of us. We have to bring the community with us. We know it's going to happen. The government is committed to these carbon reduction limits. You know, I think as long as we can listen to the community, as long as we are part of the community and they trust us, it comes down to two pretty important things. There's timing leads to trust, and trust is all about timing, to make sure that we get the information out there, that nobody's taken by surprise, and that everybody is aware of what we're doing all the way along. So, and that's why we really strive to be proactive about this. We seek out the stakeholders. We seek out the stakeholders that want to object, have concerns, have the issues. They're the people that I try to target to talk to, because it's by giving information, then you can allay concerns. You know, a lot of the fear factor is about lack of information. So if the information is there, then people can start making their own concerns, and we'll see that it just makes sense. Yeah. I hope that answers the question.
No, that's fair. Look, social license obviously is critical, and I think not just anecdotally, you know, public acceptance of infrastructure projects. We see it with whether it be Apple data centers or renewable energy projects. There's a job of work to do, I think, maybe in the whole engagement space and improving things. But maybe just slightly continuing that theme a little bit, Yvonne, there's a question from Jose Espina. Is a financial contribution to local communities on offer as a result of these developments? And what size of contribution, and how and what will these contributions be channeled to? So I suppose, again, maybe that's tying in a bit with some of the new requirements in RES, community ownership and things. Can you expand a bit on that for us?
Yeah. Currently, it's a really complex question. So, as part of the Wind Energy Ireland working group that I'm part of, we're coming up with a position paper as to how we can create a model. Because there are so many of these projects coming on board, we need a model for how to, like, the scale of community benefit funds for offshore wind is so much greater than those for the onshore wind farms, that we're trying to kind of get a grip on the kind of numbers that we're talking about here. So there will be community benefit funds. We're trying to get a shape on it for RES 2. And, you know, as the project progresses, we'll then be able to put a model together in order to allow as many people in the community to access these funds, which I've no doubt will be welcomed and well used. Yeah,
okay, perfect. Lots of questions coming in. Karen, we might roll on with a few more if that's okay, yeah? Okay. So question, a really good and topical question from Tom Murphy. So a lot of organizations are now looking to hire people with offshore renewable energy experience. Is there a skills gap in Ireland? And if so, what's the best way of overcoming that gap? Adam and Simon, I guess, technical engineering skill sets, are they lacking to an extent?
Yeah, I'll say a little bit first on that. They're lacking in terms of the numbers, of course, because this industry isn't developed yet. So we don't have a country full of technicians, for instance, who can maintain these bases. And also, as we were talking earlier about, you know, upskilling and the inward investment into the country, into the ports, that will require people who can do that work. They require people who can build ports, who can assemble the turbine infrastructure, the barges, who can tow them to site, who can moor them, etc., etc. So we don't have that. We obviously have a level of expertise in the country. Do we have enough numbers? No, we certainly don't. And Yvonne would speak this better, but we are starting very shortly an education outreach piece of work that actually goes into the schools, and it's going to tell the story and get the kids involved very, very early on. And they're not going to be working on our Inishelga project anytime soon, but the next projects that we develop after that, then they will be.
Yeah.
Can I just hop in there? And I'm afraid, Adam, chances are they will be working on our Inishelga program. You know, we want to start young. We want to get the, just to try and input, you know, if there's engineering in the curriculum, why don't we start directing it towards offshore engineering? You know, also, we need it to be government-led in terms of curriculum, getting, I liken this to the software. I started life as a software engineer way back when I started. And back in the 80s, we didn't have any software engineers, but yet look at us now. We're one of the global software engineering headquarters in the world. And I kind of see that that's about to happen with offshore wind. We just need to get the training started. And I know that there's been definitely inroads into getting the curriculum changed. We're looking at how we can upskill people with offshore experience without the engineering experience, people with engineering experience without the offshore experience, that people that want to leave their current industries and leapfrog into the offshore wind industry. That's another whole set of upskilling that we have to look at. And it's wonderful to be part of Iberdrola because they have such a strong history and a strong education base in terms of upskilling. I know that the East Anglia One project, they run courses constantly with apprenticeships and things like that. So what we're going to do is use their model and work alongside them so that they can show us how they did it. And we've got a really strong support model for that.
Yeah, can I just add to that, Harry, just very briefly? I think there's a lot of enthusiasm from you know, people from oil and gas, from young people who actually want to be in renewables, whether it's offshore wind or solar, or there is a genuine enthusiasm from a lot of areas that people want to do it. And you know, we're having conversations with, you know, the Maritime College. We will be having conversations with all the various universities around the state and beyond, and trying to say, well, actually, what do we need to do? We have, and I can tell you just on pure experience, trying to recruit people with offshore wind experience is actually very, very hard. So in an Irish space, we might get an awful lot of sort of oil and gas and experienced offshore and other parts of offshore, which is great. And they can bring skill sets with them, which is equally great. But in terms of saying, well, it's easy to find an offshore wind engineer or something like that, it's actually, even at the stage we're at on development, it's hard. And that's obviously going to carry on as we get through into, okay, well, we're building it now. So this is an area I think that's actually pretty key for the rollout of this. You know, we're at early stage, but I can tell you 5 gigawatts in the water by 2030 is certainly not nothing. And this bigger ambition beyond that is doubly not nothing. And it's not just about ports and grid infrastructure. Those are two big things that we absolutely have to deal with. It's the manpower and the people who are going to build this stuff. So, you know, it's exciting at the same time as challenging.
Yeah, for sure. I think maybe just to add from an Energy Cork point of view, a big role I think for ourselves to play as a, you know, a cluster, you know, bringing forward that triple helix model with industry, academia, public sector, bringing together stakeholders and trying to, you know, formulate plans to support plugging these gaps. So look, the clock is ticking on. We might just go with 1 or 2 more questions. There's an interesting one here from David Hennessy, which is, look, a little bit off topic, but not necessarily. I might put it to you, Adam. What's prohibiting wave and tidal developments from being progressed at the same pace as offshore wind?
You want me to take that one, Adam?
Yeah, I think so, Simon. Yeah, as he's involved in it more. Yeah.
Okay.
So putting my other hat on, because I have multiple hats, as I think you said earlier, Harry, I'm so co-president of Ocean Energy Europe, which is Brussels-based. It's the wind, sorry, not wind. It's wave, tidal, OTEC, ocean salinity. So it's basically everything which looks like energy from outside. And we are doing a baby demonstration project in the Bay of Fundy, Nova Scotia, which is a tidal project. We have looked at doing a tidal project off Fairhead, off the Antrim coast. And we would have future ambitions, very much so, on hybrid wind and wave projects off the West Coast in particular, and potentially just wave. The reality is, I think when you look at the speed of wind, the scale of wind turbines, it's not that long ago, 6 megawatts was an offshore turbine. We're now looking at Australia project with 6 megawatt onshore turbines. Offshore, as Adam said, we're looking at 15 megawatt machines available now, and we will be looking at 18 to 20 megawatts by 2030, and talk about 25 megawatts into the 2030s. And this is coming from somebody who, when I first heard, when we were doing projects at 750 kilowatt turbines, and I thought they were big, and some madman came in talking about 2 megawatt turbines. I'm going, you're absolutely barking. 2 megawatts, what are you talking about? And now look at where we are. The challenge, I think, for tidal, particularly in an Irish context, is the tidal resource isn't anything like the wind resource. The wave resource off the West Coast is phenomenal. But if I can put my engineering hat on, wave is hard. It is actually hard. Your working fluid is, when you're looking at sort of 3 meter waves, and this is your average wave set, and you're trying to get energy out of that, that's all very well. But every now and again, we get one of these things that comes off the Atlantic, and we don't get 3 meters, we get 23 meters, or maybe 29 meters. So the whole survival bit on wave is a challenge. That said, there are some very promising technologies which are coming on, which I think in the back end of the 20s and into the 30s will start to have a major impact on penetration on renewables. And that's interesting because it has a different generation profile than wind would have. So you end up with mixed hybrid generation. So, and that can then help our storage challenges. So it's an exciting space, but it's hard. That's the fundamental issue, I think.
Okay, great answer. Thanks, Simon. So maybe just wrapping things up with one more question. So thanks for a very interesting presentation. So are there any remaining technological risks which could jeopardize the development of floating turbines in deep water? Are there existing case examples of operational floating turbines in waters with comparable wind and wave climates to south and southwest coastlines here in Ireland? Who wants to put up their hand for that one? Adam?
I think, Simon, you're probably best to way more experience in this than I have.
Yeah, so once I get talking, you can't shut me up. You know?
That's okay.
You were warned at the beginning. I did throw out a health warning. Yeah, so floating technology is new in a wind space, inverted commas new. Floating technology in an oil and gas marine space is not new. So a lot of the technologies we're talking about, like the semi-submersible structures, have been done for many years in very deep water for oil and gas. So you're not looking at something which nobody's ever thought about or ever done before. There are challenges, undoubtedly. And I think one of the challenges becomes one is talking about the West Coast now, which is why, you know, we're looking at, which is why it's no accident. Everybody's very focused on the East Coast at the moment, and potentially nearer shore on South Coast, is because when you start getting into deeper water and bigger waves, it gets more and more challenging. But rather ironically, when you get into deeper and deeper water, other than the cost aspect, which is obviously you're now talking about, if I was off California and we were talking 500 meters, you'd say, well, that's a huge issue. But the reality is actually at 500 meters, the wave as a proportion of the mooring system is actually relatively small. So there are definitely technical challenges. I don't think any of them are insurmountable by any means, and people are working on them. There's a number of floating projects off Scotland, as you may be aware. That isn't heavy wave regime. There's also a number in approaching FID on the French coast, and there'll be a lot more happening in Taiwan and so on. So it's all happening. If I could say, there are no showstoppers in this piece. It's just about getting the economics right and dealing with some of the challenges. So it's not it's not a showstopper on anything by way, shape or form. So that's my positive view of the world, I think.
That's great. That's great. Thanks for that, Simon. Okay, we'll wrap up. So, folks, so thanks very much to our speakers this afternoon, Simon, Adam, and Yvonne, for their introduction to DP Energy and their activities. Great to see, you know, continued innovation and job creation in this space in Cork, which is fantastic. As ever, thanks to Cork City Council and Cork County Council for their continuing support via their economic development funds. Thanks to you all for tuning in and engaging with the discussion today, as well as our previous briefings so far in 2021. If you have any feedback on this event or would like to discuss speaking at a future briefing, don't hesitate to get in touch. A recording of this event will be available at www.energycork.ie shortly, and we'll be back in September with more briefings. So until then, thanks to our speakers and thanks to you all for joining today. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.